It was a cold December night in Iraq, 2003. The wind carried the dust of war across the broken city of Tikrit, Saddam Hussein's hometown. For months, the world's most wanted man had vanished like a ghost. The dictator who once ruled Iraq with an iron fist had simply disappeared. American forces had toppled his regime in April. Statues were torn down, palaces seized, loyalists scattered. But Saddam, the symbol of power whose face once covered every street and billboard, was nowhere to be found. Rumors spread like wildfire. Some said he had fled to Syria. Others claimed he was hiding among loyal tribes in the north. Some even whispered he was already dead. But deep in the Iraqi desert, American intelligence officers believed otherwise. Someone, somewhere, was protecting him. It began with a single piece of intelligence, a name, a man close to Saddam's family who might know something. Colonel James Hickey of the 4th Infantry Division received the information late at night. He and his soldiers had spent months chasing shadows, raiding safe houses, interrogating captured loyalists, searching through bunkers and farms that led nowhere. But this time, the lead felt different. The man's name was Mohammed Ibrahim Omar al-Muslit, one of Saddam's closest bodyguards and confidants. He had been seen moving between safe houses near Tikrit. That was enough to act on. Hickey ordered a team from Task Force 121, the elite special operations group, to join him. These were some of the most skilled soldiers on Earth, Delta Force operators and intelligence specialists who had one mission: find Saddam Hussein. The operation that night was quiet and deliberate. The soldiers moved under cover of darkness, their vehicles cutting silently through the desert roads. They surrounded the house where the informant was believed to be hiding. There was no gunfire, no shouting, just the sound of boots and metal as doors were broken open. Within minutes, Mohammed Ibrahim was captured. At first, he refused to talk. For hours, interrogators pressed him, sometimes gently, sometimes with firm words. They told him it was over. They showed him pictures of captured Iraqi leaders. They told him his family would be treated fairly if he cooperated. Slowly, his defiance began to crack. Finally, he gave them something: coordinates, a clue, a name of a village, Ad-Dawer, just south of Tikrit. There was a small farm there, he said, and Saddam sometimes visited it. Sometimes he stayed for days, sometimes only for a few hours, but that was the best lead anyone had received in months. Colonel Hickey relayed the information immediately. Within hours, Operation Red Dawn was born, a secret mission named after a movie about resistance and rebellion. 2 target sites were identified, Wolverine and Wolverine 2. No one knew which one Saddam would be in, if any at all. On December 13, 2003, just before dusk, the mission began. The air was cold, and the sky hung heavy with sand and smoke. Over 600 soldiers from the 4th Infantry Division and Special Operations units surrounded the area. They moved fast, silently, every man knowing the importance of what they were doing. This was not just another raid. This was the final hunt. The soldiers closed in on the first site. It was a small farmhouse surrounded by palm trees, quiet and unremarkable. A few men were inside, but none were Saddam. They were detained and questioned. Then the troops moved toward the second site, a cluster of mud, brick huts near a river. It looked deserted, but there was something strange, an odd patch of dirt near a small shack, covered with loose bricks and debris. One of the soldiers noticed it moved slightly, as if something was breathing beneath it. He called the others. Slowly, they lifted the bricks and brushed away the dirt. Beneath it was a small hole in the ground, barely big enough for a man. It was a spider hole, a hidden underground shelter used to evade detection. The soldiers peered inside, guns ready. The light from a flashlight cut through the darkness and revealed a bearded man lying inside. He looked thin, exhausted, and startled by the sudden brightness. His eyes squinted, adjusting to the light. He raised his hands. One soldier shouted, "Show me your hands." The man obeyed. For a moment there was silence. The world seemed to stop. Then the soldier called out, "We got him." The man was pulled from the hole, blinking and trembling. His beard was long, his clothes dirty, his once carefully dyed hair now streaked with grey. When they asked for his name, he muttered softly, "I am Saddam Hussein, the president of Iraq, and I am willing to negotiate." The soldiers looked at him, almost in disbelief. The man who had once lived in golden palaces was now covered in dirt, pulled from a hole in the ground like a fugitive. One of the Americans replied coldly, "President Bush sends his regards." Saddam was searched, and inside the hole, soldiers found 2 AK-47 rifles, a pistol, and $750,000 in cash. Not a single shot had been fired during the entire capture. As he was led away, Saddam looked around at the soldiers surrounding him, his captors, men who were barely in their 20s. There was no rage in his face, just fatigue and quiet disbelief. He had ruled Iraq for over 2 decades, built statues of himself, and crushed anyone who opposed him. Now he was being escorted through the night by men who spoke a language he didn't understand, in a land that no longer feared him. The news spread fast. When the message reached the command center, radio silence broke. Voices cheered. Some soldiers cried. For months, they had fought through ambushes, bombings, and sleepless nights, chasing the shadow of a man they weren't sure was still alive. Now, that man was in custody. Back in the United States, President George W. Bush was informed almost immediately. He smiled and said a simple sentence that would echo around the world, "Ladies and gentlemen, we got him." When the words were broadcast, people in Iraq and across the globe watched the footage, Saddam being examined by military doctors, his mouth checked, his hair brushed aside. The once mighty dictator looked frail and defeated, no longer the feared leader who once commanded an army of millions. Some Iraqis cheered, others wept, but everyone understood what they were seeing. An era had ended. That night, the soldiers who carried out the mission sat together, eating field rations in silence. Some laughed quietly, others stared into the fire, thinking about what they had just witnessed. They had seen the end of a chapter of history with their own eyes. For many, it was surreal. For others, it was justice. Colonel Hickey later recalled that Saddam was calm and polite during his transport. He talked about his sons, about the war, about how he believed history would remember him differently. He refused to admit defeat even in chains, but as the convoy rolled through the desert toward Baghdad, his silence grew longer. The lights of the city appeared in the distance, and he knew his time as ruler of Iraq was over. Operation Red Dawn became one of the most successful special missions of the Iraq War. It was not just a tactical victory, it was symbolic. Capturing Saddam didn't end the violence in Iraq, but it marked a turning point. The man who had ruled through fear and oppression had finally been brought to justice. Over the following months, Saddam was interrogated, tried by an Iraqi tribunal, and eventually executed for crimes against humanity. But for the soldiers who found him, the memory of that night remained vivid. The smell of the earth when they lifted the bricks, the sound of a man breathing quietly in the dark, the moment they realized who they had found. Years later, some of the men who were there spoke about it. They said it didn't feel like a victory celebration. It felt like the closing of a heavy chapter. One of them described looking down into the spider hole and thinking, "So this is how it ends." Another said that when he saw Saddam's eyes, he didn't see a monster or a ruler. He saw an old man who had run out of places to hide. That image stayed with him more than the mission itself. The story of Saddam's capture became part of modern history. Textbooks would later describe it as a triumph of intelligence and persistence, the culmination of months of work by soldiers and analysts. But behind those official words lay something more human, the exhaustion, the doubts, the endless searches that went nowhere, and the cold, silent night when one last tip finally led to success. In the end, it wasn't a massive battle or a dramatic chase that ended Saddam's rule. It was patience, precision, and a handful of determined men willing to dig through the dust until they found the truth. As dawn broke over the Iraqi desert that morning, the sun painted the horizon red and gold. The helicopters lifted off, carrying the captured dictator toward an uncertain fate. Below them, the palm trees swayed in the wind, and the small patch of dirt that had hidden one of the most notorious men on earth was left behind, just another hole in the ground. The mission was over. The war was not, but history had changed. Saddam Hussein, once the most feared man in the Middle East, was no longer a ruler or a fugitive. He was just a prisoner, and the soldiers who found him, young men from far away who risked everything, had done what the world thought was impossible. That night, as the desert went quiet again, a sense of finality settled in. The ghosts of the past still lingered, but the dictator's voice was gone. The hole was empty. The hunt was over.